5 Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to the Checkered Flag podcast. And on the year of the dragon, it makes sense to go back to the land of the dragon. Yes, it's the Chinese Grand Prix for the first time in 5 years. BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson is alongside me, as well as Jolyon Palmer, former F1 driver, and F1 journalist Beck Clancy, who will now be editor-in-chief of Autosport. So that's your panel. Lots to talk about. Firstly, Beck, congratulations.
Oh, that's very kind. Yes, all came about as a bit of a surprise. Have loved my time at the Times as where I was previously, but yes, left there because I didn't want to do every single race, and now I'm not doing every single race. Just to be clear, I'll be about 6 or 7, and I will still be in your lovely ears, dear BBC listeners. So yeah, looking forward to it. Joining at the end of the month. So yeah, it'd be great to be at Autosport.
Cracking. Well done. Andrew Benson, let's come to you. Back in China, first time in 5 years. You've got the iconic Shanghai, which is about 60 minutes on the train away from Shanghai circuit. I just remember it as a place with bad food, lots of smog, and rather uncomfortable beds. But am I deselling China now?
Well, blue skies today, Jenny. So you're deselling it on that front. But I don't think it's anyone's favourite race, is it? It's a long way to go. The track's not that brilliant. It's a long way outside the sexy bits of Shanghai. And I was actually surprised the Formula One went back there. They had an opportunity not to after such a big gap because of COVID. China's position in the world geopolitically has changed quite a lot in that period. But they have decided to keep it on the calendar, presumably for financial reasons primarily. And I guess it looks good to have a Chinese Grand Prix, but they could have... There was a point where they were thinking, after dropping Russia, shall we drop China? They haven't.
Yeah, well, I do understand. I agree with Andrew, but I understand why they're going back. A population of 1.4 billion, fast-growing middle class with lots of expendable cash, huge market to tap into in terms of the fans, and that all-important Chinese driver who will be driving in China for the first time this year. We have Zhou Guanyu. So that, I imagine, was forefront of their minds when they returned to China. I understand there was some deliberation at the start of the year as to whether or not we would go to Shanghai. It's a bit, I feel a bit odd calling it the Shanghai International Circuit. It's a bit like calling Luton a London airport. It's not really anywhere near the city, and it takes an hour to get there, and you can never get a seat. It's always a fight. Surprising there are blue skies. The first 2 years I was in Shanghai, I went and stood on the Bund and didn't see the skyline. The smog was so bad.
Oh no!
Not my favourite race either. A paddock that is so massive, you get lost in it regularly. But yeah, I do understand, given the bottom line, let's say, if I was a cynic, which I am, why we have returned.
Do you know what? I once counted my steps across the weekend because you have such a long space of just tarmac between the paddock and the garages and the pit lane and where all the teams are housed. 21 miles. It was a ridiculous amount of walking just to get from A to B. Jolyon, give us something to cling on to. What's good about China and the Shanghai International Circuit?
I mean, you guys are keen on the hot sell of China, aren't you?
And a sprint
down
weekend.
On everything. I don't think there's anything left for me to add on top of that. I would say the paddock is vast, but it's quite a nice paddock in the back. There's I don't know if there's like little lagoon areas, but it's quite nice. The traffic, I didn't get the train. I didn't realize there was a train option from Shanghai. Oh, it could take like 2 or 3 hours in carnage traffic every day. Last time I was there, we were smogged off from driving on the Friday. So I'm not going to add to the weather critique. It's not great, although hopefully it's going to be better this weekend. And I hear a lot of people this year saying, oh, the track is great to go back to a real driver's circuit, such an iconic circuit. Is it? I mean, it's a very odd track. There's so many long corners. And when I'm talking long corners, it's almost 360 degrees, the first corner. It's almost a full circle, which is, I'll give it unique. I used to hate driving this place. I really did. I never went well here. And I'm looking forward to commentating on it a little bit more.
I can't remember off the top of my head your results, and I should have done my prep and I should have looked up exactly where you finished. But
I'm glad you didn't.
Oh no.
I was actually, I'm embarrassed to say I was last in 2016. I'm going to own that. And 2017, I was 13th. Unlucky for some. So
Oh dear.
I hated it. It's a really bad track, and it's one of those circuits. Some drivers will love the flow of the circuit. You turn in, and then it's just scrubbing speed, feeling out your balance, and the corners go on forever. Turn 1 and turn 11, 12, those ones as well. The 12, the right-handers, and again, like 270 degrees, and you're just waiting. Yeah, the middle sector's okay, some higher speed stuff. You can get into a nice flow. That section, I would say, is good. But the rest of it, I just found frustrating to drive, and it shows.
Okay. Well, one driver who will be beside himself for the Chinese Grand Prix is Zhou Guanyu, of course. It's his first ever race in front of his home fans, and the first one for a Chinese F1 driver because no other driver has taken to the race. They have done practice sessions, but first race outing. And Andrew, that must be a massive thing for him. He's dreamed of being an F1 driver. He's dreamed of driving in front of his nation.
Yeah, and he kind of just hung on to his seat to be able to do it, didn't he, this year? And I don't know how much longer he's going to hold on to that seat. He's not he hasn't done that well. You know, he's not made a particularly compelling case to be a long-time Formula One driver, even though he's been talking as if that's what he wants to do. This morning, he was doing that in the context of Fernando Alonso, who we'll come on to later. I don't think he's going to have Fernando Alonso's career somehow.
Who will?
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be a great thing for him, and I'm sure it'll be great for the Chinese fans. And his face is all over posters all over Shanghai City. But outside of China, I don't think it's going to make that much of an impact.
And Beck, when it comes to ticket sales, it's gone mad. And I'm sure that must be part of the Zhou effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we've been really negative. Now we can be positive, full of the joys of spring and not cherry blossom anymore after Japan. Ticket sales have been brilliant. It's been a sellout in a couple of hours, I believe it was. Although I'm Miss Cynical. I'm always Miss Cynical. I never quite believe when they say it's a sellout. I've seen sellout a few times, and I've also seen empty seats at the same time. So I sort of take it with a pinch of salt. But when we were there last time in 2019, there was only 40% of tickets were sold, and it was just a bit ugh. So yeah, the Zhou effect is definitely in full swing, I would say. It's great that it's a sellout. I don't just think it's the Zhou effect, though. We haven't been there for 5 years. You know, there are a lot of racing fans in China. They want to come back. They want to see what's happening. Pretty much nothing has changed apart from they've resurfaced it, which could lead to an interesting, and I don't mean that in a good way, weekend. There's not going to be much grip, let's say, at the start. And I know we'll come on to this. It's obviously a sprint weekend as well. Yeah, great that they say it's been sold out, but we'll see what the cameras say.
I'm interested to see what a sellout looks like at Shanghai, because my years ago, I was there for 3 years driving, and one was reserved 2 racing. So when I was racing, you do the driver's parade, you go on the back of a flatbed truck, and the main grandstand is busy. And it's really busy at the end of the hairpin, which is the best overtaking place on the track, turn 15, the penultimate corner. But you get on the back of the flatbed, all the drivers together, big furore as you're setting off down towards turn 1. And you go through that 360-degree corner, and then you're out into nothingness for like 4K. And there were a couple of grandstands that were actually just sort of like boarded up effectively. So I'm interested to see if there's going to be fan support. I know there will be on the main straight. There's always good there. There's a decent atmosphere. And the same with the hairpin, which has seen a bit of action. It's the best place to watch, probably. But if they've managed to get the atmosphere around the whole track, I think that'll be quite telling. And I think that will be, fair play for having the race here. If there's that level of interest that they can sell it out.
And it is a sprint weekend, as we've mentioned. This format slightly changed, Andrew. Can you just run us through what they've tweaked?
Yeah, Max Verstappen says the new format makes a lot of sense, or makes more sense. He's no fan of sprint weekends. Basically, what they've done is they've made it a sequential event now, rather than sticking the sprint in the middle of the weekend. So you go from first practice on Friday to sprint qualifying on Friday afternoon, the sprint race, the first thing on track on Saturday, then Grand Prix qualifying on Saturday afternoon, then the Grand Prix. Whereas before they had sprint qualifying and sprint all on the Saturday. We'll see how it works. Another small change, which the drivers and teams are happy about, is that the Parc Fermé regulations have changed so that the cars can be changed after the sprint if they're not happy with some aspects of the setup. So that basically brings it more like a normal Grand Prix weekend. So because Parc Fermé starts before Grand Prix qualifying on a normal Grand Prix weekend.
What do you think about those changes? Because to me, there's the first part, moving the actual sessions around, is devaluing the sprint a little bit, but putting more emphasis on a conventional weekend. But I'm interested in the opening the Parc Fermé again, which the teams and drivers were pushing for. But that takes away like an element of the randomness of the sprint weekend, which I quite liked about it. 1 hour of practice and then you're locked in.
I mean, I still think that the sprint is an answer to a question no one asked really in the first place. And they just, I think what's difficult is that because no one really asked it and the drivers don't really want it, and the sort of hardcore fans don't really want it either, it feels like they're playing around with the edges of something that is an awkward fit anyway. So that will be my view on it. I mean, I haven't objected particularly to any of the formats of the sprint weekend, although I didn't like this thing in the Saturday sandwiched in the middle. But I don't know. Let's see how it is. One of the bad things for me about sprint weekends, I don't know what you think, Beck, is there's a much bigger gap between the two track sessions on Friday and Saturday. So there's an awful lot hanging around.
Right. So, Benny, firstly, I disagree with you. I think the question was asked, and I think the question was asked by me and many others as to how do you reduce practice and the tedium of it. Sprint possibly isn't the answer, but and I think Liberty deserve credit for this, who own F1. I think they deserve credit for trying to make more relatable or more, action that actually means something. I hate practice. And I saw Carlos Sainz saying this morning that he doesn't agree with having the first sprint race. There are 6 this year. This is the first one. He doesn't agree with having it in China because they haven't raced here for 5 years. So his argument is you only get 1 hour of practice and then you're straight into sprint qualifying. Well, boo-hoo, these are the best drivers in the world. They have so much time on the sim. They're going to be absolutely fine after an hour. And I actually agree with switching it around. I like the new format. And I know it's the 4th change to the sprint format in 4 years, so it's going to get a bit confusing for fans. But I think it's a good idea. My only question is going to be for those teams at the back of the field who know they aren't going to get any points. I think it's still the top 8 who get score points. If you know you're not going to score points and you're a bit rubbish, like let's say Alpine, you're probably just going to use it as another practice session, right? Because you've got Parc Fermé open again. And that basically only came about because of last year in, COSA in Austin. You might remember Lewis Hamilton got disqualified because the floor of his car had more wear on it than it should have done. And he said it was because of the setup and it was a sprint weekend and they had thought it had been fine and it wasn't. And anyway, he got disqualified and Charles Leclerc as well. And so this is why they've now reopened Parc Fermé. And actually, no, it wasn't great for Lewis Hamilton. It was his best weekend of the year, although he was disqualified. I quite like the kind of jeopardy and that was thrown in. So on that front, I sort of do agree with Jolyon. And I don't really love the idea of Parc Fermé being opened again because, that's sport, right? All the other cars got it right. All the other teams got it right. They just got it wrong.
I agree with that. And you've got to be more cautious then. The teams have got to learn from that in Austin and they'll know from the 1 hour of practice how bumpy the track is. They'll get feedback. They'll see some wear. I think is sort of harsh on Lewis and Charles like last year in Austin, but I think that's these teams. If you want to go right up to the limit, then you're going to take that risk. So I think there's a part of that, and I also think reopening the Parc Fermé allows the best teams a chance to hone their setup in the best way. Last year, the amount of times where Leclerc would be right on it in qualifying because Ferrari managed to start well in the 1 hour of practice. They'd get themselves to the mix. And I think Red Bull are a team that, given 3 hours of running, can hone their car in. How many times do we, even this year? I think Melbourne was an example. Okay, Verstappen didn't do the race really, but he was on pole. And the whole day through Friday, it looked like he was on the back foot and they were troubleshooting problems and managed to sort the car out. and if it's the best car and you get it into the right spot, he's going to win. So I think allowing the top teams generally a chance to reset their setup after a sprint race gives them, a big leg up when otherwise they might have struggled for a weekend.
It's not like it's a safety thing. It feels like they've just given into the teams.
Yeah, and you can argue actually that we're all talking about these stats of Red Bull's wins and how far they go back, and they all go back to Brazil 2022 when George Russell won for Mercedes. Well, that only happened because of exactly what you're saying, Jolyon. Red Bull messed up their setup, didn't get it right after the first practice session, and they were stuck with it all weekend. We'll never know, but I think there's probably a strong argument to be made that had they had Parc Fermé open on Saturday afternoon, that wouldn't have happened. And therefore, Russell wouldn't have won that Grand Prix, and then that Red Bull run would have gone back to whenever it was he started winning in the summer when Ferrari imploded. So, I mean, there's no right or wrong about that, but you're right about it removing an element of uncertainty. And I think, just to go back to the point I was trying to make about sprints, I think the issue with sprints really is that they don't really feel that they matter that much. So, Beck, I take your point about practice, and you hate practice, but okay, the sprint is a race, but for what? A handful of points for a few people. Is it a compelling reason to watch it? I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
But isn't that more a reflection on the state of the championship? If the championship was closer, it would matter more.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. Yeah,
but you're still talking 1 point difference between first and second, aren't you? It would matter more, but it's not going to be the difference between winning the race and coming second in the Grand Prix. You're talking about 1 or maybe 2 points.
Mattered in 2021.
Yeah, okay, but we can't say everything is like 2021 because that is a freak year. That will not happen again. If only
it all was like 2021.
Yeah. We're unlikely at this state of F1 with 24 races and half a dozen sprints to have a season that comes down to the wire, is the blunt truth. So when you're talking about a point here, point there for the sprint, in reality, the big teams, Verstappen, if he doesn't win the sprint, he'll be top 3. And in that case, on a bad day, he's losing 2 points.
That's my point, exactly.
But do you want to go back to practice? What's the alternative?
Well, I mean, the thing is, if you follow your argument to its logical conclusion, Beck, then every Grand Prix would be a sprint. So,
So, well, I actually think, this is a controversial one, but I think a 2-day weekend. Saturday,
it's
Sunday.
Not controversial, it's absolutely logical.
It is, but I know a lot of fans don't like it because
the promoters mostly don't like it.
The promoters don't like it, the fans don't like it, and they want to see the track action. So I'd like somehow to give something back on a Friday, but putting drivers in the car and giving them 3 hours of practice is too much. We've seen it many times before. My debut in Formula One in Melbourne, I'd never been to the track before, never driven there, tricky circuit, and Friday was a washout. So I turned up on Saturday, had 1 hour of practice, dialed in, it was a really busy session, and then went straight into qualifying. And it was fine, and it was fine for everyone. And we've seen it before with Imola, literally trialled a 2-day weekend a couple of years ago, didn't they? You don't notice the difference by the time you get to qualifying in the race, but there is a little bit more jeopardy because you haven't given the best teams all the teams, the hours to get their car set up, but then the best ones, if they get it right, will win. There's a little bit more jeopardy in there. So I think the sprint, in some ways, to me, can be a drawback because you see so often with the sprint race, it's like a dress rehearsal of the Grand Prix. You see the tyre issues that are going to come up, like we had in Brazil last year. The drivers then can drive around these issues because they know they've done a third of the Grand Prix by now. They know what to expect. They've done a race start. They know, each driver's, if someone's going to go do a move around the outside at the first corner, they know to be wary of that for the next day. There's loads of these things where if you just go, bam, one Grand Prix, that's your lot. For me, that's still the best case. I'm all about a Grand Prix Sunday.
Well, let's move on to the talk of the town this week, which hasn't been Beck Clancy's move. It's been Alonso staying at Aston Martin. Andrew, you must be delighted that he's going to continue in F1 for another, decade maybe?
Isn't everyone, Jen? I mean, the guy's he's a one-man story generator, isn't he? But seriously, I mean, the guy's a force of nature, isn't he? And I think also, you can laugh about my admiration for Fernando Alonso, and I do admire Fernando Alonso, just like I admire all the top Formula One drivers. But I think it's sometimes not properly acknowledged just what he's achieving at the moment, he's completely resetting what's possible as a top Formula One driver. The guy's 43 in July. He's just signed a new contract, which if he sees it out, which presumably he will, he's going to be 45 and a half by the time he finishes that season with Aston Martin Honda in 2026. And he's still driving at a level which is as high as almost anyone in the field, which means as high as almost anyone has ever achieved. And he's in his early 40s. It's absolutely remarkable. And I think we should just that alone we should appreciate.
I saw a stat that by the end of 2026, he will be the oldest Formula One driver since 1975 when Graham Hill was at the wheel.
Yeah. Now we don't know what level Alonso is going to be performing at by then, but right now he's performing higher than Graham Hill did when he was at the same age in the early 70s. So I think that's the point. Graham Hill had a real tail off in his 40s, and you have to go back to Fangio basically in the mid 50s before someone as old as Fernando Alonso was in Formula One and performing at this level, and Hamilton's going to be doing the same, presumably, if his Ferrari contract goes for it's at least 2 years, his Ferrari contract. So he's going to be until the end of 2026 at least. Now, he's not as old as Alonso, he's 2 or 3 years younger than him, but we're seeing a reset of what's possible for a Formula One driver in terms of age. And I just find that really interesting. And I'm really looking forward to spending some time. I'm going to talk to Fernando Alonso once on a one-to-one basis before too long, and I'm really looking forward to exploring that with him and what that means.
It will be interesting to see. I couldn't believe that stat. For the first time in 50 years, he's going to be the same age basically as Graham Hill. He will be older than anyone in between. It's like Premier League footballers going back to playing when they're 50, like Stanley Matthews or whatever. You know, it's really rolling back the years when you've got 20 drivers, you've got the youngsters always coming through. In my opinion, you know, the bar always gets higher and higher because the youngsters come through with better techniques, better learning. You've got Kimi Antonelli, 17 years old, already pounding around in a Mercedes, getting prepped for his Formula One debut. Verstappen did the same. You know, the standard should be evolving all the while, and yet Alonso can stand the test of time. And it will be interesting to see if he is still able to cut it at what would it be, 45 and a half, you said. When Raikkonen was on it in his twilight years, the last year or two, it looked like his reactions were just going a little bit. He was making some sloppy errors from the outside. I think that's the sort of thing that you'd be watching out for, is sort of judgment errors that will come in. But maybe they won't for Fernando. He's different, isn't he?
I mean, F1 has got easier for a driver, hasn't it?
I mean, I don't know. They were vomiting coming out of the car in Qatar last year. It was not easy. There's 24 races. It's a ruthless schedule. I think, you know, the physicality, maybe compared to 20 years ago when it was low fuel, the refueling era, the cars were light, nimble, darty. There was probably more G on the body, but you know, when they're able to push, these cars, they do fly, and we saw that in Jeddah as well. Last time out, Ollie Behrman was on the limit just to finish the Grand Prix. It is not easy to be a Formula One driver physically, and then you're away for 24 races in the year. Half the year, you're basically away and on the road. To keep that level of fitness up, again, Logan Sargent said last year he was a bit undercooked coming into Formula One. The best drivers, or the most of the drivers, are in amazing physical shape, so they can cope with it. But there are a few races on the calendar where they are tested properly. And yeah, if your fitness is dwindling, you're going to be found out.
Well, I like the press release very much. It was just 5 words saying, "I am here to stay." Let's hear from Alonso, hopefully more than 5 words. He spoke to Tom Clarkson in the press conference earlier.
It's never an easy time when you have to make some decisions, especially right now for me. It's probably my last contract. So I wanted to make sure that it was the right decision. First of all, to keep racing in Formula One and to have the strength and the motivation to keep racing for a few more years from my side. And then after that, just making sure that the team has the targets and the goals for the next few years to be ambitious and to try to keep getting better and better. So yeah, it was, I think, a very happy decision for me. I'm obviously extremely proud to represent Aston Martin for the next few years. We started the journey last year and in a very good way, and we keep on working. So yeah, extremely proud, happy, and let's see what we can do.
Well, what is it about the team's future that excites you the most?
I think the new regulations in 2026 is going to be a possibility for everyone to mix the cars a little bit and have an opportunity. Obviously, we will be with Honda. We will be the only team with the power unit from Honda, which obviously it is a little bit different than being a customer engine now with Mercedes. So hopefully we have a little bit of an improvement there, and the team is just getting better and better. New facilities, new campus, new wind tunnel coming this summer. So yeah, there are a lot of things in place to be a very powerful team in the future, and I wanted to be part of it.
So that's Fernando Alonso talking to Tom Clarkson. Now, I'm just looking for the record books. Fernando Alonso's last win was Spain 2013. So signing with Aston Martin again, do any of you think or believe that he can still win a race or a championship? I'll start with Rebecca.
Yes to a race. I think it's still there. Okay, not always, but there can be moments of unpredictability. And I think he is an exceptional driver, as Benny said. He deserves to be on the grid. He deserves his place. He's not just keeping it because of his name. He is still very, very good and very much near the top of his game. And I think that puts him in a position to be able to capitalise as and when, very rarely, Red Bull might make mistakes and a gap may open to that top step of the podium.
Julian?
I think race, yes. And I actually think championship, yes. I think in the right circumstance, he can do it. But that's obviously going to depend now heavily on Aston Martin. So I think the big thing is 2026 is the new regulations. Aston Martin have Honda engines coming for then. Honda engines effectively powering the Red Bull right now and seem to be the benchmark. If he's still got his current level at that point, there's going to be some movement in the driver market. There will be definitely big swings in performance for 2026. If Aston Martin can just find a little bit more, they've got good infrastructure, decent budget. Never know what's going to happen with other personnel around the team, but they are putting in place a crack squad for 2026. I honestly think, given the right machinery, we saw it last year. He was brilliant the first half of the year when he had the car underneath him. That's a title tilt run if he's got it, and he might yet get it in 26.
Jolien is a believer. Benson?
Well, I think that he believes it. You could hear it in his voice there. What he was basically saying, in terms of the reset the regulations and Aston Martin's ambitions and Honda and everything, he was saying, we can win again and I can win again. And I don't think he would be in it. I don't think he would have committed to be in it for so long if he didn't believe that was going to continue to be the case for at least the period that we're talking about for this latest contract. And he's been saying it for a long time, hasn't he? That age is just a number, effectively. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he means. And that's not, age isn't going to be the limiting factor, is the way he puts it. It's more to do with motivation. And his motivation and dedication is clearly still very, very high. And as Beck says, he's still performing at an exceptionally high level, as indeed he proved through last year. His drive in Brazil, for example, was absolutely outstanding as well. When he beat Perez to third place. So assuming he doesn't lose a position, it doesn't lose anything in terms of his own performance, and assuming Aston Martin can become competitive, why not? Anything's theoretically possible in those circumstances.
I think the interesting thing for Alonso is that there's no real teammate battle for him. Is against Lance Stroll, who is one of the weaker drivers in the field, and he's beating him every week. And that's impressive in itself. Stroll on his day can be good. But if Sainz was to sign for Aston Martin, then I think we'd see a really good comparison of where he's at. Whilst he's got Stroll there, these guys could continue at the team for eternity. Alonso's going to keep beating Stroll. Stroll's the son of the owner. Where's the end game for this? At what point does one of them start to look bad enough? Because Alonso's got the cachet, 2-time world champion. He's a big character. And whilst Lance is alongside him, he will be under no pressure over the course of a season. Here or there, he might get beaten, and he is sometimes.
You mentioned Raikkonen earlier as well, Julian. One thing that surprised me about the end of his career in that last year or two, it's how quickly it seemed to drop off. And I couldn't work out if that was age and reaction times or if that was kind of his own motivation. And so it'll be interesting to see how much Alonso can stay on top of it, or if it's just going to happen and how much he's going to be able to halt that decline.
Well, hopefully you're still motivated to listen to more. We'll talk Red Bull next and the other contenders this weekend. Plus, the 2025 calendar has been announced. We'll get into that. Well, let's look ahead to this weekend. And Red Bull and Max Verstappen, obviously, still favourites to win, Andrew Benson. It looks like the script hasn't changed from the end of last year.
It hasn't changed for about 2 years, has it, Jenny?
True.
He's the favourite to win. I mean, I think that he's going to be the favourite to win for a good while yet. Although we're hearing positive noises from Ferrari in the medium term. They've obviously got some big development coming, which they haven't told us when it's going to be yet, but they're talking about potentially challenging Red Bull more often when that happens. But even putting that to one side, they were pretty strong in Australia. It's a bit debatable as to whether they would have beaten Verstappen had he not had that brake problem. But this is another track where they ought to be on paper strong. It's normally a front limited circuit, and there's normally can be what they call graining here with the tyres, which is where the surface tears. And the Ferrari's been strong all races recently where there's been graining. So Las Vegas at the end of last year and Melbourne was another example. So if that happens, that's a reason to believe optimistically maybe Ferrari can be closer. Do I realistically think that means they're going to beat Verstappen? No. But, hope springs eternal, doesn't it? Someone's got to someday. Well, I know the Sainz did it 2 races ago, but in a straight fight, I meant.
At the moment, Verstappen leads the championship by 13 points from Perez. Could Rebecca Clancy, Perez, challenge Verstappen at all this weekend? He seems to be getting a little bit closer.
No.
Okay. Moving on.
Let's be honest. I mean, we've been talking about teammates and state of teammates and quality of teammates, and Perez is about as midfield as they come. A solid midfield driver who is having, a lot of off weekends. Sometimes he has a good weekend. Don't really know which version of Perez is going to turn up. No, let's be honest. I mean, Verstappen is in a league of his own, and we were talking earlier then about Alonso, and he is, he's right up there as one of the best in F1, and Verstappen is absolutely up there without any shadow of a doubt, and Perez is not.
He's also not the strongest when it comes to the front limited circuits, like Andrew was talking about. You've got Ferrari who are good when you've got to limit yourself on the front tyres. All these long corners around Shanghai, it puts a lot of stress on the front tyres, particularly the front left. And Perez, the old tyre whisperer moniker that was thrown at him the whole time was when he was so good at controlling the rear tyres. And traditionally, that was where Pirelli in the early years, it was all about managing your rears with occasionally it'd be front deg. More and more, it's becoming even and some more front issues. And this circuit won't suit Perez's rear tyre management, which is where he has been actually really good. And it still is quite good on certain circuits now.
Julian, why are some drivers good at tyre management and some not? Is it just driving style?
Yeah, I think it's a feel for grip, driving style. I mean, generally, I think the quicker drivers are going to be better at tyre management as well, because you can have the pace and just rein it back in certain phases. So if you have rear limitation, then you've got to be really smooth on the throttle. You've got to be careful not to have sort of under rotation at the rear on the brakes. And you can sort of V the corners off a little bit more, do everything in a straight line to help the rears. If you've got front limitation, it was way harder to manage because you basically have to go slower through long, high-speed corners, or you dial in a load of front end to try and rotate the car. And there's a little bit of personal preference there. I could deal with more rear deg than front deg, and I think that probably be the same with Perez, where he's actually got quite a good sensitivity in a straight line, but as soon as he's got lateral loading on the car, then you're sliding a little bit more. And also, bear in mind, he's got to try and make up a sort of 3/10, 4/10 gap to Verstappen. So he has to lean on the tyre more than Max to make that happen as well.
It's also, just to add to that, it's about adaptability, which comes down to talent, basically. So, you know how the same way two cars can look closer together in qualifying when they're benefiting from the peak tyre grip, and then the gap extends in the races like we see with the Red Bull at the moment. You also get that between drivers. So when you've got the peak tyre grip, a less good driver can be closer to a better driver. Whereas as the grip starts to go away in the race, the better driver can adapt and they lose less performance as a result of that. So that expands the gap between those two drivers.
Let's hear from Max Verstappen what he thinks about this weekend.
Max, a long time since we last raced at this track. What are the team telling you about the conditions? What are you expecting? And what are you expecting from the tweaked sprint rules this weekend?
Yeah, a lot of unknowns, of course, from the track. Not having raced with this new generation of cars. So I think FP1, of course, again, is going to be very important to get hopefully quickly in a good rhythm. And honestly, just work from there, see what you get. I do think that the new sprint format is better. It gives you also more opportunity to still work on the car. It seems all a bit more logic, I would say, and I think that's what we needed.
I read a stat that since the 2019 Chinese Grand Prix, you've won 50% of all the races since then. Does coming back here after 5 years sort of bring to mind the journey you've been on with Red Bull in that time?
Yeah, a lot, of course, has, I think, changed for the whole team since 2019. It's a bit, how it goes, I guess, in racing as well. But I'm just excited to be here and just, hopefully have a good weekend here.
Well, that's Greg Stewart talking to Max Verstappen. And Rebecca, you've got some lovely stats about what's happened in the last 5 years since we were last racing in China.
Oh, yeah. So to add to Verstappen winning 50% of the races, there's an article on the F1 website. So everything that's happened since we last raced in China in 2019, Hamilton has won his 6th and 7th world title. Max has then won 3 in a row. Racing Point has become Aston Martin. Renault has become Alpine. Alfa Romeo has become Sauber. Toro Rosso has been AlphaTauri and is now RB Cash Card Bank KTM. Kimi Raikkonen and Sebastian Vettel have retired. And as we've mentioned, Fernando Alonso has returned from retirement and will probably never retire again.
It's a massive period of time, that 5 years, but seems like the same people are up for it. I mean, Lewis Hamilton goes really well around here. 6 wins which is a record. I think there's absolutely no chance of anyone who's won before at China winning again, because it's Alonso, Ricciardo and Hamilton. Jolien, they haven't got any chance of winning anything, do they?
Well, no one's really got a chance of winning anything whilst Verstappen's in the field, don't they? And if he's not, then you're looking at the Ferraris now, or Perez to pick up the pieces. I would say Hamilton, I'm expecting to have a stronger weekend here. He's always been quite good in China. Famously lost the 2007 title, but since then he's been very strong in China. Won the last race here, as you mentioned. And I think Mercedes will be better around this circuit with the low speed. I think their mechanical grip should be fairly decent. So I don't think it'll be enough for him to win. But I would say of those 3, obviously it'll be Hamilton, then Alonso. And if Ricciardo wins, we are in for an absolute thrilling Grand Prix.
Everyone here has to do a shoey if he wins. McLaren playing down their chances. Lando Norris saying it doesn't suit them, this track, Andrew.
That's right. It's long corners they're not good at. It's something to do with the airflow. McLaren design doesn't work. They're working on trying to improve that, but they've not got the upgrades that they need yet. It's been a bit of a problem for the last few years. On the subject of Ricciardo, by the way, he really needs a good weekend because he's coming under increasing pressure. There's already speculation about him potentially being replaced mid-season by Liam Lawson, the reserve driver there, the guy who stood in for him when he broke his hand in Zandvoort last year. So Ricciardo really needs a good weekend. One of his greatest drives, actually, was to victory in China, wasn't it? Remind me which year, was that 2018?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So he needs to recover some of that form, really, and not be lagging behind Yuki Tsunoda as he has been so far this season.
Rebecca, let's just come on to the calendar because that's been announced between the last race and this one. And Australia is back as a season opener and we are all delighted, I'm assuming.
Oh, yes. We are all very, very, very happy about it, particularly me, because in my new role, I'm going to significantly fewer races, but one of them is the season opener. So I'm absolutely delighted to be heading to Melbourne for the first race of the season. It's great because it's winter here and it will be lovely and warm down in Melbourne.
You're just thinking about a tan, Clancy.
This is a podcast, but if you could see me, my pasty Irish skin knows full well that I do not tan. But no, it's great. It's a great track. It doesn't always lead to the best racing, but there is a buzz about this paddock. It's got sellout. I mean, it actually has sellout crowds. It's actually a city race. You know, from the track, you can actually see the city. When you say it's in Melbourne, it's actually in Melbourne. It's in Albert Park. It's kind of sandwiched between the city and the beach. You have awful jet lag. You go for morning runs along the beach. It's just wonderful. There's just so much energy. It's a really classic F1 race weekend and a great way to start the season.
It has to be a season opener, doesn't it? It just has to be. The whole, big trip over to Australia and then having it's a brilliantly attended event, as you said. And you've got to come with the razzmatazz of who's going to win the race. It's the season opener. And that's where I grew up with Melbourne as the season opener. I drove with it as the season opener. And I just think it has the appeal of a season opener. When you move it into race 2, race 3, I think it loses a little bit of the charm, sadly. So I'm really pleased to see it back, number one.
So the season will start on the 16th of March. Australia race will be back-to-back with China, and the season will finish on the 7th of December in Abu Dhabi. Happy with that calendar, Andrew, or is it just too many races still?
Look, my opinion doesn't matter, does it? But I think most people...
It always matters to us.
Most people in Formula 1 think 24 races is too many, don't they? It's especially when one person's winning 95% of them, whatever it was last year. It's too many no matter what. I think a Grand Prix should be special. It should be an event, and they are all events in their own right, but they kind of blend into one when there are so many, in my opinion. But it doesn't seem like there's any prospect of that changing. But the other two are absolutely right. Melbourne is where the season should start, and it will do for at least another 3 seasons. Between now and 2032, but unfortunately that's all it will be because that's what's demanded in its contract. Otherwise it'll be in Bahrain or who knows, maybe Saudi Arabia one day.
The big thing about having more races on the calendar to me is that, like as I mentioned already, you're just reducing the chance of the title fight going down to the wire. Is maths. With every race that you add to the calendar, there's more chance for one team to get more than 25 points clear of the next. If you had 16 races, which it used to be way back when, which probably everyone would agree would be quite a small amount right now, but then a Verstappen DNF in Melbourne, and it starts to get quite sweaty for him. Another DNF or 2 in the year, and maybe he can't even make that up with the beast of the car that he's got now. But with 24 races, I think you're allowing the best team, best driver, so much opportunity to build a gap. And that 2021 season was a freak. We would be so lucky to have anything like that again in the next decade. And so I think you can't always just harp back to that and think it's happened before, because the maths will say that we have so many that are wrapped up with like 6 races to go now.
So we've started with disappointment, we've ended with disappointment, but hopefully we've brought some brightness in between. Would everyone agree?
I can't wait for this weekend. It's going to be an amazing weekend.
No one's listening anymore. We're bickering.
Well, thank you very much to Jolyon Palmer, Beck Clancy and Andrew Benson. You can listen to the Chinese Grand Prix on 5 Live. Full details of all session timings can be found on the BBC Sport website, with the race on Sunday getting underway at 8 o'clock, build up from us at 7:45. You have been listening to an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.